Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So the way Shop Talk works is just like the way it's worked in all the prior episodes. General idea is drop in your questions, we will make up answers on the spot. Sometimes it'll even be the correct answers. So with me tonight, to my right, Mala Mahadevan.
Hi, everybody.
Below, Tracy Baggiano.
Hello.
Who did the most celebrating of the 4th of July.
Yep.
So we
Red,
now
white,
have
blue.
Yep. We now have 4th of July hair for this week.
For a
And
couple weeks.
for what?
For a few weeks.
For a few weeks. All right. Well,
It takes a while for it to rush out. Might keep it all summer.
That's fair. All right, we'll have it all summer. And special guest star, Jared Poche.
Good evening.
So, Shop Talk. We take your questions. We give you answers. Make up answers doesn't sound like the right phrase. Maybe provide answers. I know what I said. Technically, for legal purposes, we provide answers. For actual purposes, we're probably making it. Yeah, show where everything's made up and the answers don't matter. Although I liked the British version of the series better, but pretty much, yes. So
you said something about the rules earlier, and I was exactly thinking that the rules are made up and the points don't matter.
Exactly. So, whose line is it? We're going to start with tonight's problem. The Halloween problem. So, here's a very brief synopsis of the Halloween problem. Despite having no talent or ability to play their instruments, I still love Misfits songs, including Halloween. That's the Halloween problem in a nutshell. But it turns out there's Halloween protection. And that's a totally different thing other than 1980s punk bands. The other Halloween problem is that Danzig were much more musically talented than the Misfits, and yet I like the Misfits more. That may, I don't know, take that how you will. My hope is that most of the people in the audience are like, who are the Misfits? And the answer is, don't worry about it. They were a great band if you loved bands that had zero talent, but just jammed on those instruments. Can we take a vote on my Bills shirt? The only vote will be how quality it is compared to the other Bills shirts, and they are all excellent quality. So that's pretty much the way the vote works.
It seems less worn.
Actually, this one might be one of the most worn. This is actually one I use for cycling.
I see.
So it's got more little piling pieces than the other shirts. So let's talk about Halloween protection. And for that, let's go down to special Halloween correspondent, Jared Poche.
Okay, well, I need to thank you first and foremost because I came to you with this problem. I was like, I don't know what the SQL Server Optimizer is doing. It's doing tricks. And I've been working with SQL long enough that I feel sometimes like I've seen everything, and every time I think that, SQL Server comes up with something to surprise me with. So the Halloween problem in this case was something I ran into while trying to optimize a stored procedure that I've been working on and off for the last couple of months. And it's something that we run 350 million times a day. In our case, we're trying to update some quantity information in our inventory. And it's we run this thing very, very often, and we're trying to optimize it. And what we ran into is I added some logic to an update statement that said, well, update this value only if the new value isn't the same as the old one. And what we got from the execution plan, I actually put this on a blog post of mine a week or so ago, and I've got an example of the execution plan. And it had multiple extra index update operations and a split and a table spool and an index delete and another index update. And it was like really complicated to a degree that just was crazy. And we were making the change to not update rows unnecessarily. So what should have happened is we were envisioning, okay, it's gonna read the data in the table, it's gonna figure out it's not updating these rows and filter some rows out before it hits the update operator, which is the most expensive part of the query. But instead we got this jumble in our execution plan. So when I brought it to Kevin and described the thing, he he said, well, that sounds like the Halloween problem. Now, what the Halloween problem in this case was, or how you could state it really simply, is if you're trying to query something while you're trying to write the same thing, you're probably very close to Halloween. In this case, we were updating the quantity while our where clause was also referencing the quantity column.
Right. So let's walk through a, I don't know, mock-up demo. I call it a mock-up demo because it's just here. Let me show you. This is, I'm gonna call this maximal quality. Hop over to screen number 3, camera number 3, and we are going full screen on this. So this is a write-up of the canonical Halloween protection problem. So the idea is you have a table of people who make a certain amount of money, and you want to write an update statement that is maybe something like set salary equals salary. So give people a 10% raise where salary is less than 25,000. And my expectation is that, you know, we're going to give everybody a 10% raise. So that's going to be, and then 23, that's what, 25,300. But this person doesn't get a raise. So actually,
the first one would be 23-1, yes?
Yeah, maybe. Let's just go with this. We're gonna pretend that that's the right number. The numbers don't matter. The numbers don't matter, people.
They don't.
Actually, I think it's like 22-1. So this is what we're expecting. But what actually happens, what could happen, is as follows. Think of implementing this problem as looking through a list. You're iterating through a list, and we've got a filter here on salary. We're looking at the salaries, and they're in order, so we're indexing on salary, and we're going to give this person a 10% raise. Well, a 10% raise here is $2,100, so that person is now at $23,100, and we gotta sort this, so there we go. Now we got this one at $22,000. We're gonna give you a 10% raise, so that's what, that's $2,200, so $24,200. Great. We're doing well so far. At $23,000, we're gonna give you a 10% raise, so $2,300. So that's $25,300. We're doing great. Everything's going well. At $23,100, we're going to give a 10% raise, so that's $2,310. So you know we're at like $25,410. We're doing great. The problem is that we're not doing great anymore because the process essentially is looking at each row one record at a time and iterating over and over until everybody is above 25,000.
Updating rows multiple times.
Yes. So what happens is that database engines have some built-in protections to prevent this statement from ending up with the result where everybody's over $25,000. And that concept in SQL Server is implemented as an eager spool. So an eager spool, I love Eric Darling's explanation for eager spools. It's SQL Server's passive-aggressive way of telling you that you need a table. Because what it's doing is essentially it's creating a table for you and storing your data in that table. So Jared, why would it do that?
Well, in this case, what it's trying to do is it's what you described as kind of the normal row mode operation of SQL Server. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to break that. It doesn't want to operate row by row because if it operates row by row, it can pick up that row a second time. So what it's doing by spooling is it's taking all that data and caching it somewhere. So it's kind of got, like you said, so it's got it in a separate table so that it's not doing the fundamental thing I said earlier, which is trying to update the thing while you're querying it. It's kind of querying it from a second place. It's querying it from that spool. And when it does that, that acts as a blocking operator, which is something else I've blogged about, but it needs that blocking operator to stop having individual rows flow through one by one. And so it can just gather all the stuff up at one time, then it knows what it needs to update.
Yeah, that's exactly. And I've already linked to the first post of a 4-set Paul White series of blog posts on the Halloween problem. Mala gave me this link here to an Itzhak Ben-Gan column on how to avoid performance problems with Halloween protection. And this is an area where you can get performance problems. So what ways can we possibly get out of a Halloween performance problem? Mostly going for you, Jared. I'm setting you up here.
Well, what I was doing, in my case, I thought about it a bit, and what we finally came up with is I created a second table. But what I did was I created a memory optimized table, and I read into this memory optimized table the stuff that I was going to need to query from my base table in order to do this update. So I basically took that information and I cached it, and I put it here for actually a couple reasons. It helped with my update, but it also helped with another operation I wanted to do later in that same procedure. So I got to use that information a couple of times. But I read in the data from the base table. I had my old value. I calculated my new value, and I put all of that in my memory optimized table. Then when I updated the base table, I wasn't reading from the table and updating the same table. I was reading from my memory optimized table variable and updating the base table. And since it's memory optimized table, it works really well. And like I said, time is everything for this procedure. We were trying to optimize because we run it so often. And what I found from looking at the query store data on it is it took us about 90 microseconds to run the query and populate the memory optimized table variable, and about 10 microseconds to read it. So, for a 1/10 of a millisecond, we got our data put over in this memory optimized table, and we were able to run our update a lot more efficiently after that.
Yeah, and Raymond mentioned selecting to a temp table, which is basically the same concept.
Same thing.
Yep.
Exactly.
The question from the Duke is it vectorized in the case of column store? That is a good question.
I had a similar thought, which was if we were not so much using column store, but I was thinking about the row nature of this. I had wondered if batch mode processing would resolve this as well, which would only matter if you were using SQL 2019 or if you were using column store indexes. But the thought had occurred that if we were using batch mode, we might not have this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't know. I do not know the answer to that.
I think it would come down to whether, well, SQL's still going to batch it in a batch of whatever size, and if the batch isn't enough to get all of the data in one go, I think it would probably still need to have the Halloween protections.
I would think so. Yeah, I don't know that batch mode by itself would prevent or obviate the necessity for Halloween protection, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Raymond mentions doing this with inventory management system shipping. Yeah, if you have things where you've got a lot of frequent updates, and you need absolute best performance on those updates, then it may be a viable option for you. And yes, you do need those protections. They are there for a reason. You really don't want to have an update statement end up giving you results that you don't expect. And that's why they're there. When it is a performance problem, there are some methods that you can use. This technique that we had, just one technique. There are others, so I would recommend checking out Paul's set of 4 posts and Itzhak's post that Mala linked to here. And Anders is in the chat. I'm glad that he has finished blowing things up for 4th of July and is now just blowing things up for no reason at all. So great. That was the Halloween problem. And the other Halloween problem already mentioned, I don't think there's really going to be an answer. Although I do have a real urge to link the Hips Don't Lie video with Danzig and Shakira, because that was beauty. That was a thing of beauty. Nonetheless, we're going to talk about our next topic of distributed availability groups. So Tracy, you've been working on distributed AGs for quite some time. So wait, Raymond says he plays guitar badly if you'd like it. Yes, I think we should probably set up our own punk band, where none of us know how to play any instruments and all sound horrible at it. I think it'll work.
The sequel punk band.
It can't be worse. Actually, I guess it could be worse. We'll have to debate that later. So, distributed AGs as an upgrade path. So, taking us from SQL Server 2012 up to a more recent version.
Yeah, something more modern. Basically, distributed AGs allow you to have one AG connect to a second AG, so that you can have an AG running on Windows 2012, and you can set up a cluster AG on Windows 2019, and then fell over to Windows 2019 and just destroy your 2012 boxes and have everything running on 2019 without losing anything. We used it in a weird way at some other company I worked at that we won't name, but that's not how we used it there. But that's what it's mainly used for. They created it to help out with migrations to Linux and things like that. But it's also a great way to upgrade from Windows 2012 or 2012 R2 up to 2019. Because you can't put a 2019 box into a 2012 cluster.
Right. Remind me, for availability groups, can you have different major versions?
No, not with SQL Server.
Yeah, only with distributed.
You're just using this just to upgrade the operating system. So you can have it on one side of the AG, but as soon as you fell over, you're upgrading that server itself. So you're usually, when you're upgrading your SQL servers, you're upgrading your secondaries first, and then filling over your primary and letting your your secondaries become your primary and upgrading, and then you're upgrading your primary and filling back.
Right.
So you have a complete upgrade and you have no way back at that point.
Yeah. Though, would you ever want to go back?
Nah, I did all the channel advisors like in a few weeks at night. So.
Yeah, that was 2016 to 2017?
Yes. We just recently did 2017 where I'm at now, too, so.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. So the question from Anders is, who has their TV on? I'll let you take a guess.
Good question, Anders. We could have guessed that one, though.
On topic, relevant.
Off topic.
Hey, as long as I don't get a copyright strike, it's okay. So, if somebody wants to try to follow that same upgrade path, do you have any advice that you might want to give?
The main advice is, if you want to fail back just in case something happens, like you want to get back over to your 2012 server, they don't have the steps documented for that out there, not anywhere where I can find them. There'll be a future blog post on that coming. I just hadn't got around to it yet. But you can modify your listener to listen to the other listener, because like when you do a distributed AG, you point it to listener 1 and listener 2 of your AG, of your different AGs. You don't point it to the server names. So you can swap those around when you fell over, so you don't lose your connection string. So when you swap those, that's how you would keep your connection string. Because I know like Stack Overflow did theirs and changed all their connection strings when they did their upgrade. And you don't have to do that when you do distributed AGs. You can just modify the listener and flip the listener names around
Right.
and keep your connection strings.
Which is
That's a pain in the butt to change everywhere because
yeah.
some programmer somewhere's got it hard coded.
Yep.
More than likely.
And it's a good reason to have the listener be referred to completely independently of the server itself.
Yep.
Where you give it its own domain alias and everything.
And the other important thing to remember is there's going to be downtime because in the Microsoft documentation, it tells you to cut all your users off from updating data. It doesn't point it out big enough where you see it, but it's written in the paragraph.
Okay.
To kill all connections. So, disable your users before you do it. That way you can let everything sync up before you fell over. And then modify the listener around so that you don't have to change your connection string.
So you'd be talking 5-10 minutes?
Oh, we were able to do it in under 90 seconds.
Okay. Under 90 seconds is not bad. Maybe on an extremely busy server it'd be a bit higher, but take it.
So.
And if you do have a complete failure on upgrade, like you hit a severe bug immediately, then you can always take everyone back down, switch it back.
Yeah, you can modify the listener back and re-enable your users and be back up and running on the other system. It says it in the documentation, but the other important thing is to make sure your LSNs match up after you kill your users because it is an allowed data loss failover. But I've got a PowerShell script for that I'll put in a blog at one day. But just compare your LSNs. It gives you a script for doing that. So you can compare them side by side to make sure that they're the same. They usually match up. Even on our busy demo system that we did, it was a perfect match once we killed the users. And it says synchronized, so it was like, last LSN, they were all the same before you do that failover. That way when you fell back, you won't have any issues if you had to. Hopefully you just don't go back.
Right. Hopefully this works.
Just the 8-year-old operating system.
It is at this point beginning to show its age. And yet you still have people on 2008 R2. You still have people on 6.5, I'm sure.
Yes,
what's interesting is everything I've read about 6.5 versus 7, 6.5 was probably better in most regards. Like Randolph West had a post where there was a test of Anders is throwing shade at my statement. So Randolph had a post where it was essentially which versions of SQL Server can you run on Windows Server 2019? And Randolph mentioned getting SQL 6.5 to work through crazy hacks, and it was like barely
Why
usable.
would you expend that level of effort?
Because you can. Versus 7.0, which did not work at all. Apparently, Anders is saying that you can run SQL 7 on Windows Server 2019, and that would be interesting to try out just to see if you can.
Yeah, we have nothing else to do. We're in a pandemic. We're stuck in our houses. We got to entertain ourselves and find these things out.
The Duke says, rather spend my time playing Doom. The only question is which of the 500 different variants of Doom.
That's why someone else did it for us. That way we know, and they wasted their time.
That's true. That's true.
Now we just have useless knowledge in our head.
Yep. But I have great memories of as a young child playing Doom with my dad. We would turn on the God mode code, IDDQD if I remember right, and IDKFA as well, of course, and would just run around with a chainsaw and ultraviolent. It was good father-son bonding experience for us. I got to control the chainsaw. He moved the Marine around, and we went and killed them all. Killed them all without anybody being able to hit us. So be more of a to trick SQL 2019 to run on Windows 2000 DEC Alpha. You know what, Anders? You get it running on Itanium. That'll That'll be the real trick. You get it running on Titanium, and I know people who will pay you. Love the mods for co-op. I never actually played Doom co-op. Titanium's for amateurs. I'm glad you're back, Anders. I'm glad you're back. Next, running SQL Server for Linux and WSL2. Again, that would be interesting to try out. Actually, I'm not sure why you wouldn't be able to do that. And that's kind of where I would expect it to go with containers, where I'll just run the container natively in WSL2 and the SQL Server on Linux container. So I think that's not going to be too big of a deal. But that's also me saying it before I actually do any of that. So, famous last words. I thought adding F# support into Jupyter Notebooks for Azure Data Studio would be pretty easy because, hey, I got it to work in Jupyter Notebooks itself. Famous last words, folks. Famous last words. Speaking of famous last words, let's talk about security. That was the best segue I'm going to come up with tonight.
The best segue you got?
It's not a very good one.
Who likes security compliance people?
Specifically, hang on, Anders. It's the silliness of security compliance, so you can stick around.
Yes, that's why your XP command shell's got to be disabled, or DAX got to be disabled, or some other silly thing let me find on my wall.
Tracy has a wall. Yeah, 30-minute rant. So
I have stick.
Well, XP command shell is not entirely stupid, is it?
No, XP command shell is no problem at all. So, all right. I'm going to let you finish, Tracy.
Who has access to it, though? If you have the right security, who has access to it?
Yes.
Right. Who has access to it is a better question than turn the whole thing off.
That's exactly my point. It's kind of silly to just test for things to be off and on. Like they want DAC disabled. What are you going to do if your admin needs access when the server's under high pressure?
Right.
Like we just tell them we're not supporting that configuration, but I mean that leaves us slightly out of compliance and lets the manager have to explain it every time the compliance people come. But it's still in their 30-page document or 60-page or how many, depending on which compliance org you're with. But I mean, they want your SA renamed or deleted, and which it's like it's just a SID of 1. Just query that, and you can find the SA account.
Yeah. So, all right. For that, I'm kind of okay with it because I'll rename SA and then create a new account called SA and give that account 0 permissions.
That's what I did.
So I mean, it's just like if somebody gets in as SA, I'm just trolling them now.
But part of the secure compliance is also you rename it and you don't have an account name SA in the same security compliance.
Yeah, so that's a little bit silly. Just a little bit silly. It's not horribly silly. Like on a scale from 1 to silly, it's probably like a 3. However, disabling XP command shell because of security problems, that definitely ranks as silly. So
database mail.
Sorry?
Database mail. Why do you have to have database mail disabled?
Because you can exfiltrate information with email.
How do you get alerts? I mean,
database administrator
working anyway, so
yeah, you don't need alerts because alerts give out secret information. So we can't have any data come out of the database.
That's what traceflag 3625 is for, evidently, according to Stig. You turn that on and it eliminates error messages from having personalized information in it.
That's, if I remember right, that was a fairly recent change.
If I'm remembering that trace flag correctly.
Yeah, and I think that was a recent change.
Yeah, it's in the state compliance for 2016, so I don't know if it goes back further than that.
Yeah, so Solomon mentions that SQL CLR usually goes along with XP Command Shell in the context of security over reactions. So I'm going to do this for XP Command Shell specifically, and pretty much everything I say will have an analog with SQL CLR. So here's the problem that I have with shut down XP command shell. Number one, XP command shell is very useful. Number two, by default, the only people who have access to XP command shell are sysadmins. Number three, if you are a sysadmin, because you have to be in order to use XP command shell, unless somebody specifically grants it to you, you have the ability to enable XP command shell. So there is zero security benefit to disabling XP command shell. The security benefit comes from ensuring that nobody adds yokel accounts to be able to run XP command shell. Solomon mentions that about that trace flag on error messages, same trick they did with feature restrictions, but it only works for system error messages. User error messages are not masked, which means that if your stored procedure emits any information, that won't be masked.
Yeah.
So yeah, with XP command shell, there's no reason to disable it. There are good reasons to have it enabled. It's necessary for certain functionality and beneficial for other functionality. Like, I know that Sean and Jen McCown, some of their Minionware tools, enable XP command shell so that they can work with PowerShell. And there are other good reasons to have XP command shell enabled. The trick is you make sure that you don't start granting rights to this command willy-nilly to everybody else. And again, by default, the only way you can get to it is if you're sysadmin. If you're sysadmin, it's already game over. You have access to everything. There are no security checks. The check is, are you sysadmin? Okay, I don't even perform the security check. So this is not even like DBO. This is not checked at all. But that rant now finished. I'll hand it right next back to you, Tracy. So there are quite a few silly security compliance pieces. I've ranted about XP command shell. Solomon mentions the scariness that people have around SQL CLR, and frankly,
that is one of them. They want CLR turned off.
Yeah, CLR turned off, and
where it's safe assembly.
Yeah, so safe, right, safe versus unsafe. And the dumbest thing that the CLR team, or the SQL CLR team, did when they created this product was that they used the term that C# uses, that the .NET development team uses, of safe versus unsafe, essentially to mean, can you access pointers? And database administrators don't understand pointers, so you tell them it's unsafe, and now, oh, it's a security risk. No, it's...
it's the security compliance people as well, trust me.
Yeah, they don't understand pointers either.
Because they don't understand what anything means.
They got it from a checklist somewhere. And yes, I do understand it was the .NET team that developed it. Somebody on the marketing side, or the product marketing side, the product management side, should have said, you know that term unsafe that you use? I understand why developers use it. Unsafe can write to the registry. It can do these things, yes. But I mean, they should have used a different term that didn't scare the crap out of people whose job it is to be scared all the time. Unrestricted would have been good, or enhanced. You have safe mode and enhanced mode. Spin it in a way that doesn't immediately scare people, because I call something unsafe and now it's just not a good term to use, especially when, despite the name unsafe, there are good reasons why you would want to do this. And my personal belief, with zero information, because I don't know any of the original developers on the C# team or the early .NET team, was that they probably used the term unsafe to get people to move to managed code with garbage collection, where that's safe code. And, if you don't do that, that's unsafe. So I want you to come over here and work with this, because developers shouldn't be using pointers. They understand them, they just don't know how to use them. And thus, they come up with the name unsafe because, well, you could do this unmanaged code, but it's unsafe. But essentially, it's managed versus unmanaged code.
And either reporting services or SSIS DB has unsafe CLRs in it. So by default, you can put a Microsoft product on there and fail an audit.
I believe that's SSIS DB.
I think so. I couldn't remember which one it was.
But yeah.
This was a 6 month ago project that I just now finished up in DBA checks. So, well, finishing up in DBA checks. So,
which means that eventually, dear community, you will also be able to get the benefit from months of Tracy wasting her time.
Yeah, I had to write it internally first in a their way, and then I contributed to DBA checks the better way, in my opinion.
So
because everybody can use it, and it has a pretty report, and
yeah, it's be nice to have. What the heck do you people think you're talking about? Talk to an assembly C or C++ programmer. Yeah, Mike, I'm being mostly tongue in cheek. C++ programmers are a myth. So I am being mostly tongue in cheek with the developers don't know how to use pointers thing. But that was kind of one of the selling points around Java and C#, that, hey, we'll manage the memory for you so that you don't have, buffer overflow errors or out-of-memory exceptions or forgetting to free the memory after use, so you have memory leaks. And it's... So yeah, I get where you're coming from there, that yes, if you know what you're doing with pointers, they are extremely powerful. And also calling it unsafe was, I think it was a marketing ploy on the development side, and I think it backfired really badly on the database administration side because the DBAs didn't understand what unsafe meant in this regard. Ask about the cost of hardware security extensions to a server. So I'm interested to hear what you've got there, Mike, because I don't know what the cost is. So definitely interested. Then talk about security costs with procedures and least privilege. Yeah, I don't know what the cost is. I don't have to pay for it myself and have never actually had to sign a contract or deal with the money. Has a lockdown memory model. Most languages nowadays have lockdown memory models. You know, you're not even when you talk about something like Rust, there's still memory protection in there. So I'd argue that is one of the better things that we've seen out of languages in the past few decades. That you can have memory protections without going full Java, because you should never go full Java. So, anybody else wants to add on security compliance?
let your manager do it. To talk to the auditors, I mean.
Oh, I was like, I don't know if I want my manager to do it.
Talk to the auditors for you.
Yeah, I've had relatively few experiences with auditors. Had a few.
The key thing I always remember talking to auditors, and I've done plenty of this, is that auditors are employees of your company. And just because you pass audit does not mean you're security compliant. It means you're satisfying what that person wants to see, who is an employee of your company already. So those things are important to remember. And I've been at places where there have been big security breaches that auditors didn't have any clue about.
Well, we always brought in outside auditors to tell us to audit stuff, and then what they told us to audit didn't really mean security compliance either. Like there was.
No, I didn't mean the other way around was true, but I was saying in most places, yeah.
In like places like, I'm not going to name a big auditing company, but there was a big auditing company that would come in and audit us, and like they would tell us to query like the user table out of like SQL 2000, and they would give us the query for SQL 2005. And it just wouldn't
So
work.
another thing I have a bit of a beef about is also the fact that they make DBAs set up and control the auditing, while in fact they think that they are auditing everything everybody does, and if a DBA has the power to turn off and turn on the audit and delete what the table records, then you're really not protecting anything.
Yeah.
There are tools that can do that. The third-party tools that the DBAs cannot touch, STAP-based auditing kind of tools. They're not cheap. I've worked with two of them. One is SecureSphere, the other is Guardium. They are excellent tools, not cheap, but they take the hassle out of the DBA's hands and they monitor everything everybody does. And you cannot get away with turning the trigger off, doing something, and then putting it back on and say you're auditing and stuff like that.
Right. And so Mike mentions around security compliance, do it, teach it, live it. So there's a difference between silly security compliance and actual security. And when it comes to actual security, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you work with people who are good blue team, good auditors, those people are worth their weight in gold.
Yes.
The unfortunate thing is that a lot of times we have to fill out checklists that are full of ridiculous things that don't actually help security. They're just a waste of time. And so they can sometimes even actively harm you because they prevent you from doing things that would be good for you.
Yeah.
I can give you an example. I'm going through STIG compliance for the government, so we can have government clients. And one of their things is you can't have DAC turned on, dedicated admin control, connect or control, whatever. But that connection. But that means like when the server's under high pressure load, the admin would have no way to go in and troubleshoot anything. So you're basically, okay, I just have to restart the machine. I have no way to get it back without restarting it, without being able to troubleshoot it. There are situations where I've had to use the DAC to get in there, kill a session, and get the machine running again. And without that, you're taking away our troubleshooting abilities in an emergency situation. That, to me, is a silly, and it can only be used by one person at a time anyways. So why would you, what's the point in disabling it? I don't and only a sysadmin can use it.
Okay.
So Solomon mentions, now you enable DAC when you find out that you have a problem logging in. Yeah, that is a good example of a case where you can make an argument that, oh, well, having DAC enabled can be a security problem because it would allow somebody, if somebody accesses it, it gives them administrative rights. But you already have to grant permissions that this person is able to use the DAC. You don't just like connect on a port and magically you're in with no authentication. Yeah. So there are better ways of protecting a system. We could talk about things like, all right, well, only certain subnets are allowed to access that database. You know what? Not that many people need direct access to the database. Go through an application. So we'll whitelist those application IPs, and you can whitelist a subnet that DBAs are using, or make them remote into a jump box or something. Remoting into jump boxes is an annoyance for another day. But
don't get me started on that part either. No, I got a whole special machine just for production and an IT laptop.
Yeah, and if you're in an important enough scenario where that needs to be the case, okay. Okay.
8 logins to get to production.
That seems like a lot.
If you turn off the machine, you gotta go 8 logins in to get to SSMS.
So you just leave it running 24/7?
Yeah. And every morning I reconnect my VPN because it cancels out after 24 hours, especially when I'm on call. Every Saturday and Sunday morning I come in here and I reconnect it. That way, if I'm on call, I don't have to get woke up in the middle of the night and I can cancel out the 2 of the
I was saying, yeah, we are now back on the air. So Spectrum had a Spectrum, and as a result, I had my daily drop off. Picked at a extremely opportune time. But Mala, you were saying something while I was out in the loss of internet land.
Yeah, I reviewed one book. I reviewed Andy Leonard's book on managing geeks, which I said was a nice book and a pretty unique one because most management books are written by people who are managers, but he comes from a tech world and he has a good handle on certain things that techies run into as challenges when they get into management. He does a good job of explaining that, and he talks of how to build teams and how to manage people issues within a team and such. It's not a terribly detailed, high-end management book or anything. It's just a nice little handbook on people who want to go into management being techies. So
that's
I
Managing
liked
Geeks.
it.
Managing Geeks, a
Geeks.
Journey of Leading by Doing by Andy Leonard.
Yes.
And
The second book I was trying to explain was NoSQL and SQL Data Modeling by Ted Hills, which is a very distinctive looking book, a blue book with an egg on the cover. He talks of his own a notation that he invented called the COM notation, which is an object-based notation, and COM is short for concept and object modeling notation. He contrasts that with the common notations that database folks use, which is UML and ER diagrams and such. And some of the points he makes aren't really all that valid, but it's an interesting book to read because it shows you how to model databases in a little bit different way. And he has 2 chapters on the different NoSQL tools that are available out there. It may be a little dated. I think this book is more than a year old, but still it's worth it. And he shows you how you can translate some of these things into NoSQL if that's going to be your choice. The 2 basic issues I had with this book was that it doesn't do a good job of going end to end from data modeling, starting with data modeling into actual implementation. He does not explain how he carried any project through based on this. The second is the kind of explanations he gives about UML and ERD aren't really all that valid, or it seemed very basic to me. So, but it's an interesting book and it's worth it. Those are 2 books for this week.
okay, the Amazon reviews were kind of interesting for it. So there's definitely a mix in opinions on that topic.
Right. But I didn't buy it entirely, but I thought it was an interesting read. That's
okay. Yeah. And that was, let me get the title. I've already dropped the link into the chat here. NoSQL and SQL Data Modeling, Bringing Together Data, Semantics, and Software. And now I'm curious about when that was released. Looks like it was pushed out in January of 2017.
Yeah, that's what I thought, 2 to 3 years old. Yeah.
Okay, so as we wind down tonight, and as long as my internet doesn't drop out again today, last topic is kind of an interesting one that we may revisit a few months from now, and it is, how do you get a new job? So I'll ask it specifically in the context of these times right now, or over the past few months. Not sure if anybody in chat has gotten a new job over the past few months, or even tried to get one. But it has been definitely a trickier time than in the past, where, like Anders puts it, recruiter calls me, I give them a stupid number, and then I change jobs because they paid me that stupid number. Right now, I don't think that many people are hiring. The number has increased from 2-3 months ago when it was essentially 0. But yeah, if you're out looking for a new job, what do we do? Anders still has recruiters calling. I still get recruiter emails.
I still have them calling.
But at the same time, jobs acquired through recruiters are not necessarily the best jobs
Mm-hmm.
because they're the jobs that had to pay recruiters to hire for them.
But it's also there's other considerations too. Even if when you're seeing opportunities like that, is now the time you really want to change jobs and go to an unknown
Exactly. That's what I was saying before we started.
I've got opportunities that have came to me via non-recruiters.
Okay. And those opportunities tend to be a bit better because you've kind of vetted the person a little bit.
Yes.
So Anders does mention that, hey, if your company is shaky, like if it's going to fall apart soon, then yeah, that's probably a good time to jump ship. The question is, are you going to jump to another company that's shaky? I mean, so some of us went through the post Y2K, like the tech bubble and subsequent tech recession. That was really before I got started in this industry, but what happened at that point? You know, how do you get jobs when you're in that era? April 16th, 2001. Let's go with that. Let's pick that date.
So my biggest tip in that regard, how to get jobs, is when you have a job, grow your network. Try to meet as many people as possible, not maybe if not in person, at least online, attend events like this and have something interesting to say or even interesting questions. One of the best jobs I had was because somebody was in the user group meeting and I asked the speaker a couple of good questions, and that person was impressed by what I asked. So after the meeting was over, he talked to me and said, I think you'd make a good fit where I am. You'd be interested. So you never know how these things open up. So participate, attend in as many things as possible, even if you're not a speaker, even if you're not a volunteer, anything, that's okay. Try to participate, ask questions. Don't be afraid of appearing stupid or anything, and grow your network. That's the biggest thing you can do to find good jobs.
It's great advice. I got my current job from going to a user group meeting. So
Right.
That is true. That is true.
I've not used a headhunter in 2 decades. And I know I've been seriously connected with communities, so I'm not saying everybody should be me. But I'm not a fan of headhunters by a long shot. I never used them.
Last 3 jobs have been recruiters, and the last one was via Twitter, and those are all in the last 6 years.
Yeah.
So even Channel Advisor was a recruiter. So, and then the last 2 years I've had 3 jobs, and 2 of them were recruiters, and 1 was through Twitter. So.
Look how they turned out.
And I didn't even know the person on Twitter.
One of the 3 worked out.
And they still recommended me for the job.
Yeah, you don't have to know the person that well and say, yeah, I've seen Tracy's work. I've read her blog. I know what she's talking about.
I was going to say, having a blog is like
the person actually asked me if I knew anything about AGs. I was like, just a little bit.
So interview while you have a job. Interviewing is a skill. Absolutely, interviewing is a skill. It is, especially for people who are in our industry where a lot of us don't like to deal with people. Mm-hmm. Being on either side of the interviewing counter, you definitely want to have skills. Ideally, you'll have skills on both sides, because as an interviewer, I have patterns. I have ideas. I have the opportunity to try things out to learn about people, and I'm able to apply some of that when I'm an interviewee, when I'm looking for a new job. Mm-hmm. So, it is nice to be on both sides, and Anders really hates being on the interviewer side. I don't blame him. There are many ways to do it poorly. Don't wait to hone your resume and interviewing skills. Right. Especially if you're thinking about leaving at some point, have that resume up to date. It's better even if you're not even thinking about leaving, update it every 6 months or so, because you will have worked on projects. You can go back on there and say, yeah, okay, I had to have something for this job when I updated the backup solution, but now that I've been at the company for 3 years, I have a half dozen projects that I've worked on. This is a good way to update it now, because while it's still fresh in your mind, instead of you lose your job one day and now I have to go update my resume and, well, shoot, I don't even remember what I've done the last 3 years. I've done so many things, I just can't remember any of them.
Yep. Update mine every quarter.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're looking. It doesn't mean that you even send it to anybody, but just having it available.
Worst case scenario, I have to finish off a sentence or two and I can send it to somebody.
Another important tip I want to give is some of us sometimes get, I'm not in that place now, I'm very grateful, but I've been in plenty of places like that where you are in jobs where you find it really hard to keep up technically. So if you just ignore that part of it and you wait until it's time to search for a job, you will fail the technical interview, because it is not something you've been doing on a daily basis, and there is only so much you can cram into your head just before an interview. And people who spit out answers that you crammed the previous night are fairly obvious, and you sometimes don't make a good impression with that. So find a way to keep up technically if your job is not helping you there. That's really, really important.
Right. And that could be you just train yourself on your own.
Yeah. And I know people in the community who have done mock interviews for me, and I'm very grateful for them. But that's also something, perhaps if you feel brave enough, ask a friend to mock interview you or take you apart on any technical subject. And he's not going to hurt you in any way. He's going to ask you a bunch of questions. So I really recommend that if you want to get confident with being, passing a technical interview.
Mock interviews are a good idea.
Right.
Even just recording yourself. If you have a webcam, have a set of questions. Pretend to be the interviewer. You give the question, and then you give your answer. You watch your body language. You watch how you respond.
Yes.
And just by practicing a few times, you get a bit more comfortable. You're able to deal with the questions. You're able to think about it. Mm-hmm. It's not as good as having somebody else mock interview you, especially if they're trying really hard, if they want to really try to knock you off your balance. As, look, this is about the worst that you're going to see at a real job interview.
That reminds me, Paul Randall has, for now, it's free. He has 2 links to DBA and DBE job interviews where he and his team have come up with questions. And that if you go through that, it evaluates you and gives you a rating. And it's free. I don't have the link on me right now, but I can post it later. And it might be a good way to, it's on my list of things to do sometime, but it might be a good way to evaluate yourself.
Right, just to get a quick skills evaluation.
Yeah.
All right, so with this, we are going to wrap up Shop Talk. I do want to mention that Past Summit registration is open. The link I will drop into the show notes, but check that out if you haven't already registered for Summit. And with that, we are going to say good night, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.